Hi scholars! We're going to be wrapping up some information about the Revolutionary War, and so today is a lecture-based day. You're going to be needing to take some notes on the Revolutionary War. So let's go through this together. So who is involved in this Revolutionary War? By now you should know that we have the British American colonies and Great Britain. This war has many names. It goes by the Revolutionary War, and it's also called the War for Independence. The American Revolution lasted nearly 10 years, so from 1776 to 1783. And most of the war was fought within the 13 colonies. So we've spent a lot of time learning all about those colonies, and that is exactly where the war is going to occur. Just to recap some events that led to the war, we had a great debt thanks to the French and Indian War. If you remember, that proclamation of 1763 indicated that the line would be drawn and that new territory that was once French territory is now going to go in the hands of the British. And that proclamation of 1763 allowed for the colonists to no longer move west of that Appalachian Mountain. In addition to that, we also had a lot of debt because it takes money and resources to pay for such a war effort. So a lot of acts are passed to collect taxes by the Great Britain Crown, by the Parliament, and a lot of colonists are upset about this, and they argumentatively state that there should be, quote, no taxation without representation. It becomes a cry, it becomes a mantra, a slogan of these colonists. And really, it's just explaining their frustration with the circumstances that they encountered. We also had the Boston Massacre. If you recall, we learned about it, where 5 individuals were killed as a direct result of an altercation between soldiers that were quartering in Boston and angry colonists who had lost their jobs because the Boston Harbor had been closed. So we have 2 groups of people. We have the Loyalists, who are also called Tories, and we have Patriots. The Tories are people who are going to be loyal to the crown. They are English born and bred, and they have some kind of allegiance to the crown or to Great Britain. Sometimes this is because they have a financial investment. Maybe they're businessmen or merchants. Maybe it's because they have family ties to people in England. We also have Patriots then, are people who are within the 13 colonies who are seeking out freedom and want to separate themselves from the English crown. Okay? A little bit about the British. So some things that are advantages for the British. They had the largest navy in the world. They also have hired professional soldiers. If you recall, those people, many of them already quartered and lived within the homes of British American colonists. So they are hired, they're trained, and they know what they're doing. They also have the infrastructure to produce weapons and supplies. This means that they have the ability to make weapons. They have the ability to make ammunition at their will. Something that is not in their favor is that they're fighting a war all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. So this is not their home turf. And it was very common for soldiers to actually desert or leave their posts. Again, they're fighting in unfamiliar territory. This is land that they're not familiar with, not their home turf. Some of them are coming over from Great Britain. It's the first time that they've ever crossed the ocean, and they are unfamiliar with the area. Let's talk about our colonists. They have some advantages. First of all, they are determined to win. This is a fight for independence. This is a fight of will, and this is what is really motivating and driving them. So they want to win, okay? They have motivation to do this. They also know the land because this is where they live. They have their families, they have their jobs, they have their farms. They know the woods, the mountains. They're very familiar, so this is certainly an advantage. Some negative would be that they have a very inexperienced military. Most of these are militias, which are just Minutemen. They are people who are trained just on their free will, just to work and fight in an emergency situation. We also have some disorganization. We're not really together quite yet. There's some contention between how we should run, and so we're not really super organized right now. Let's talk about the Second Continental Congress. We've kind of alluded to this. We have George Washington becomes the commander of the army, and we'll talk about that. So the Congress meets in Philadelphia during the war, and this is to create a national government. So they're going to rely on each of these states, because at this point these colonies now are states. Remember that Declaration of Independence allowed them to be considered states now. So they relied on those states to send contributions to pay for the military supplies and to pay for the soldiers. And in 1778, it was formalized as an alliance with France. So they are going to join forces with France to help the war effort. We have a lot of important battles within the Revolutionary War. We're not going to memorize all of them. That's not necessary, but you should be familiar with three in particular. The first being the Battle of Trenton, the second, the Battle of Saratoga, and the last being Yorktown. So Battle of Trenton happened on the day after Christmas, December 26, 1776, and it's a surprise attack. Washington and his militia they attacked the British, hired Hessian soldiers. These are German soldiers hired by the British Crown. And it's a sneak attack. It's kind of dishonest when you think about it. They knew that the men were celebrating Christmas the night before. Most of these men were Christians at this time, and they were in the pubs and they were, having a good time and were not expecting a battle. Well, George Washington surprises them and attacks them on the 26th. So this is a very important battle because the American colonists really, for the first time, have a victory that helps boost their morale. It really gets them motivated, like, hey, yeah, we can do this, we can really fight, we can win. And so it's very good for the cause. We learned about the Valley of Forge and how awful those winter conditions were for the men, how many men we lost for the American colonists. And so this is really good going in there because many of those men who were encountering the winter in Valley Forge in Pennsylvania, right outside of Philly, they needed something to hold on to cling on to. And so that Battle of Trenton was a reminder, hey, we can do this, we can overcome this terrible winter. The next battle that's really important that we want you to be familiar with is the Battle of Saratoga. And it's quite a lengthy battle, as you can see, September 19th through October the 7th of 1777. This is an American victory that results in the French openly supporting the Americans in the war. So this is the first time that the French say and declare that they are going to support the American colonists and their states, and they actually supply those colonists with materials, men, and goods. And this allows for the Americans to be victorious. The last battle is then the Battle of Yorktown. Again, about a month-long battle, September 28th through October the 19th of 1781. And this is where the British general, Cornwallis, surrenders to the Americans. This is, for all intents and purposes, this is really the last battle. This ends the war. This is when the British realized this was a lost cause, that the war would be in fact lost and the Americans were going to be victorious. Again, let's talk about those Hessians. So Hessians are these German soldiers that are hired to fight on the side of the British during the war. So if you remember, we talked about this now becoming a global war. We talked about it being a world war because we have two separate countries. It's no longer the colonies fighting the British, so it's not a civil war, it is an actual war. And because the Germans, or the Hessians, were hired by Britain. We have the Germans who are getting involved in the war, and then we also have France who is involved too. So the Hessians were these German soldiers hired again by the British during the war. This was very common in Europe at this time period. This is not something that would be unheard of. And there's about 30,000 Hessians who actually fought in the Revolutionary War. And then after that, about 5,000 to 6,000 is estimated decided to stay in America where the war ended. So some of us, uniquely in this area, have direct ties to Hessians because this is a very Germanic area. So that's just kind of a fun fact. Back to that Battle of Saratoga then. The Battle of Saratoga is a major turning point in the war. The Continental Army, George Washington was in charge of that Continental Army. He was hired and appointed by the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress. George Washington and the Continental Army defeats the British troops at New York, and that's Saratoga. So France had secretly been giving money and supplies to the Americans in 1775. That was in secrecy. However, the Battle of Saratoga is the first victory that really convinces the king of this time of France to create a formal alliance with the Americans in 1778. So because they're victorious, this really fuels that economic friendship between France and the American. The French are going to send about 12,000 soldiers and a fleet of ships to support those Americans. And the French and the Spanish, or soon-to-be Spanish, in 1779, engaged with the British in the battles around the world. Great Britain now is no longer fighting a one-front war in just the colonies. So they have it coming at all sides. So because of this, the British withdrew many of their forces stationed in the Americas and sent them to other British colonies in the West Indies and in India to protect against the French and Spanish attacks. So this is definitely a ploy. This worked in the American colonists' advantage. Had it not been for this, who knows what could have happened. But because the British were basically fighting from different sides in the West Indies, in India, protecting themselves from the French and Spanish attacks, some of their attention went there instead of the American colonies.